that's the big argument that Western medicine has. Do we look at the body through chemistry, or do we look at the body through energy? The Newtonian idea is, it's a machine and it's chemistry. But as an acupuncturist in Chinese medicine of, like say, 4,000 years of clinical trials can't be wrong. The Chinese saw the body, the Indians saw the body, the Asians saw the body as an energy pathway, an energy flow. What's interesting now, it's starting to happen, is we're starting to understand what the masters in India and China have been speaking about for thousands of years. We're starting to understand it scientifically. Okay? As you can tell, I'm very impressed with science. Nothing annoys me as much as when they say it's got to have clinical trials or it's got to be evidence-based, proof. I just want to do the Italian salute to it. So, how I really got into it all was, I went through a, sort of damaged childhood. I was the private boys' school. I learned to speak English very, very well in Melbourne. But in the boys' school, cane was the main way, fear was the main motivator. And I lost my father very early when I was 5, and my mother just lost the plot for a period of time. She couldn't handle it. She'd just given birth to my sister, and the father dies. I mean, it's just like quite a stress to her. So it took her a while to recover. We did end up friends, but pretty much by the time I was about 20, 21, I wanted to get out of Melbourne. It was that British slow attitude of, there was just so much stuff. Like, in the 50s, women were called by their husband's name. This is Robert Kendall. I'd like to meet you. So Melbourne was very dark and it was very down. And I just escaped and I came to the Gold Coast, which was marvellous. It was brilliant. Sex, drugs and rock and roll. You couldn't ask for anything better for a boy from a private school in Melbourne. I mean, it was paradise. All I can say, it was paradise. And but what was interesting was, I got married, that was interesting. But what was really interesting was that I took some marijuana and I took some LSD. And those drugs just blew my mind. I mean, they literally threw my mind out of the concepts of the consciousness. And we're seeing it happen again now. I'm not against drugs. I really aren't. It's the damage that you have by repeating the drug, time and time. I used to work at the drug centre on the Gold Coast, and I would work with heroin addicts down there. And they said to me, Rob, heroin is the best anaesthetic you could have for peace. And everyone I met had come from a child abused background. I didn't know how to find peace. And what they found with research was that those people's brains couldn't even produce the positive chemicals. The brain had never even produced those chemicals. So to take drugs was, mind-altering drugs, was a complete shift in everything. I ended up owning the first New Age bookshop on the Gold Coast, called Clear Light, because that was the name of the acid that was going on. But it worked really well for the books as well. And I used to get more books stolen than really, basically. But the thing was, that opened me up. I never finished high school. I had dyslexia. I had problems with hearing and reading. And I was a visual learner. Like, one thing we've learnt now is you're either a visual learner, you're either a hearing learner, or you're a kinesthetic learner. Those kids in the classroom who can't stop, they're kinesthetic. And the worst thing you can do is say, sit down, be quiet, don't move. It's just shut down their whole brain's way of learning, bringing information in. But from there, what I got into, I started going to the acupuncturist for treatment. And I'd go to the naturopath and I'd go to the chiropractor and, I'd go to them all, try them all. But what really, I noticed the difference was that when I had an acupuncture treatment, I emotionally felt better. I started to recognize that I had a lot of fear, a lot of subconscious programming to see the negative. And being a Virgo, of course, we look for the negative. or we analyse it to death is probably the best way to talk, you know. And I started recognising that acupuncture or Chinese medicine had this ability to treat not only the physical, but the emotional, the mental and the spiritual. They included all of that. So when you're treating somebody, you're not just looking at their physical body. You're looking at what's going on emotionally for them, what's going on mentally, and what's going on at their spiritual level. You know, you mightn't ask those questions, but that's what you're starting to recognise. And I liked it so much that I went to acupuncture college. And funnily enough, in Brisbane, there was one of the best colleges there when, this is 1979 when I started college. And it was one of the best outside of China. And it was great because we had chiropractors who were teachers and they were into everything. So we did applied kinesiology and they were into nutrition and they were into, you know, herbal medicine and all that stuff. So I just gathered huge amounts and I luckily got a job with my acupuncturist on the Gold Coast 3 days a week working in his clinic. So I ended up getting my own clinical experience before I even graduated, you know, because a lot of students come out and it's just too hard to work with people and stuff like that. I thought it was really easy. And then from then on, I started just learning anything I was drawn to. But I started to see the body as this energy pathways. And I started to understand the brain because what happened was in college, all my learning difficulties resurfaced. I had all the stress and strain in my second year and I could not, I was one of those people who had to read everything and nothing was enough, you know. It's the fear of missing out. And then when I went to recall it, I couldn't recall it. So I ended up reading a book called Super Learning. I don't know if anyone's ever read that. It was published in 1979. And it was a really interesting book because at the stage in the bookshop, I was teaching meditation classes, relaxation classes. Anyone been to the relaxation centre in Brisbane and knows Lionel? Well, Lionel and I are old mates for years, and he came down and bought all my books when I started. You'll find my stamp in some of his books in his library. There'll be this Clear Light Bookshop label inside the book. But what I started to understand was that where I was getting stressed, my stress was basically stopping my mind from working. It was blocking my ability to recall. And then when I got into like sort of the alpha waves and those sort of things, I understood was my anxiety and stress were putting into a high beta frequency, which is all right for taking information in, but it's lousy at bringing information out. It's not the recall level. The brain doesn't work that way. And I read the book, and the universe has always been fantastic for me because when I'm ready, the master finds me. And someone said to me, oh, do you know the guy in that book, Professor Schuster from Iowa State University, is doing a 5-day super learning course, they call it Suggestopedia, at the university, Queensland University. You know, are you interested? I went, yes. So I rang up, I got a placement from a friend of mine, and we were both into super learning, and my ex-girlfriend at the time. And we got there and there was only like 25 people in the whole of Queensland at this course. And it was very interesting to be with somebody who was working with these principles, you know. And the story is that super learning came because the Americans thought the Russians were, you know, doing all that psychic research. And the Russians thought, well, the Americans were doing all that psychic research. So they both got into psychic research, you know. There's that great movie, what's that one about the goats? Men who stare at goats, you know, this classic. But that was the sort of thing that was happening. And understanding the principles, Dr. Lazanov was the main Bulgarian scientist who put it all together. But the Russians were doing a huge amount. The Americans were doing it. And Lazanov looked at geniuses. He went and said, well, what's the difference between a genius and a normal person? You know? And every time he looked at it, he found that they were in a deeply relaxed state with a completely open mind, and they were in alpha. They were basically in a very alpha theta level of brainwave and recalling all this information. You know, geniuses, you could just go, like go, page 27, oh yeah, this, you know. Like I was watching on YouTube this baby, 1.5 years old this baby was, and it was playing the piano. It could hardly stretch its little chubby fingers over like 4 of the notes, and it was playing this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful piece of music. 1.5 years, you know. You go, whoa, it's definitely coming back. So anyway, so from that point of view, I started looking at what do I have to do to regain my memory, you know, regain my abilities to do that. And the most important thing was to get rid of my stress and to start to activate my brain in different ways. Now in Chinese medicine, when I treat somebody, they feel better. And that's a simple thing to say, but they feel better emotionally. Quite often they forget how serious the problem was. You know, they'll come in with, oh God, I can't walk, you know. You treat them and they come in next and they go, how are you feeling? Yeah. Oh, I've got a bit of a problem with my knee. And that was it. What about your back? Oh yeah, my back's fine, no problem with that, you know, like that. So there'd be an emotional shift and there'd be a mental shift and there'd be a forgetfulness of it. I don't know if anyone's done EFT, emotional freedom techniques and stuff. They found that quite common. When they were getting people to clear away their stress, clear away their problems with it, they completely forgot about it. They forgot how serious it was. That's why they get people to put a number on it, you know. 1 out of 10, how do you feel? Because you want a decrease in the number. So from that point of view, I just started looking at how I could improve my own abilities. And I probably improved my own abilities by my final year in about 30%, you know, enough to get me past. And I then went into practice and I started recognizing that working with clients, how could I then help them from a mental point of view? And I was also very interested in, I don't know if anyone's heard the Finhorn Foundation. Anyone's heard of Finhorn Scotland? Finhorn Foundation? Yeah. Okay. I read the book ages ago in my bookshop in the 70s. And the caddies came to Queensland and they were in the Queensland University. Lionel had brought them over from Finhorn. And you know, we went and listened. It was all very, very nice. And then what happened was I forgot about it. And I decided to go skiing in Europe. So I thought, okay, it's time I had a good holiday, I'm going to go over. And my ex in those days, she was saving money. We were both saving money to go skiing. And we got to Austria, where her sister was working. And within 20 days of arriving, my ex broke her leg. So now I'm spending 3 months in a car with my ex with a leg. You know. It was very hard to go to English shows in London. I booked these tickets and we got I booked these tickets and we had to be way up, you know, the cheap tickets. And then, I don't know if you've ever been in London theatres, the seats are like, you know, like here, you know. And she got there and she was like 3 seats in and she went along and she lifted a leg up and whacked it between these 2 people. And all of a sudden they've got this leg, like, you know, sticking through between the 2 of them. So we organised that she could be on the aisle to have her leg out. But what it did was, she wanted to stay in London, she was a nurse, and she could sleep, do night nursing, and so she could make money without accommodation. And I was at the age where I couldn't really officially work in London, and I didn't want to really work in London. So I thought, oh, I'll go up to Finhorn to have a look. I'll go and check it out. So I went up to Finhorn and loved it. I mean, it was just, the veil between the seen and the unseen was just, you know, completely different. I mean, it's just, so I went to Finhorn, had 6 weeks there, came back home, went back to Australia the following year, and we separated. So I decided I'll go back to Finhorn and have a little feeling. And I walked in the door and I was 42 and someone said, oh, you've come to stay. And I went, no, I'm not come to stay, like, you know, but I am free now, like my relationship's finished and, you know, what can I do? And they said, well, why don't you come back? And I talked to this lovely old lady, Barbara Darcy Thompson. She was about 82. And I said, oh, Barbara, you know, should I do this? Should I do this? And she looked at me and she said, Rob, 40 to 42 is not a big time in your life, mate. Do whatever you want to do. So she said, you know, do it. And I thought, okay, great. So I decided to come home, raise the money, and to go to Finhorn. I needed about $15,000. And I was teaching super learning workshops up and down the East Coast. I got an article in Wellbeing, and that just, everybody everywhere wanted to have a workshop. And what was funny was though, I had hardly any money by October, but I'd put it out very clearly, saying, okay, Lord, this is what I need. I need to know by Christmas. I need to have 15 grand. I need to make these things happen. So I really put it out. I, did the mind map, did the create, did all the stuff that I was supposed to do, did it on the inner, made it happen. And about October, the taxation department came and took half of my money that I had anyway, which left me with about $1,500. Then what happened was my aunt got cancer of the brain, and they said she'll be dead pretty soon. So I then had to fly down to Melbourne. So that every time I flew down was like $500. And I went down, and I loved her dearly. She was a real Aunt May, no children, but she was one of the women in my life that absolutely guided me. What happened then was she decided to die on Christmas Day, leave me about $90,000 plus her house in Melbourne, and all of a sudden I had everything I needed to go to Findhorn. So should I go? Should I not? Then I decided to run these 2 last super learning workshops, and one of my clients said, I can get an article in the Courier Mail for you on a Sunday. I said, okay, cool. It was a full-page spread of super learning and me. It also didn't leave an address except the motel I was going to do it in. And the next day, the motel rang me out and said, we've had hundreds of calls coming in. This is driving me nuts. And I said, look, I'm sorry, or we just redirect them to me, And the phone did not stop for like 4 days. I did a workshop in Brisbane, and I made about $25,000 in that workshop. And then I did one down the Gold Coast, and I made another $15,000. So for 1 minute I had no money, the next minute there's like money everywhere, right? And I went, wow, this really works. And if you're meant to be doing the right thing, it happens, And so people say, oh, your workshops are doing well, you should, da-da-da. And I went, no, I'm going to Findhorn. Luckily, I'd met this amazing woman at the same time, but she was off to Canada. So I said, well, let's have a holiday. Let's go some skiing in Canada. You stay there, and I'll go to Findhorn, and if you want to, I'll meet you over there. Well, 9 months later, she came over, and she's never left my side since then. So she just walked into Findhorn like, yeah, okay, whatever. And I was like going through personnel meetings and stress meetings, and are you really right for the job, and da da da. But the 5 years at Findhorn was an amazing spiritual experience and a mind experience. There was people, we had 30 different nations, we had 30,000 people visit us through the year. We had people from all over the world turning up. You'd be in your gumboots in the garden, and there'd be some Hollywood actor standing next to you, or there would be a New York stock agent or something. It was just an incredible place. But what was amazing was the connection to spirit. It was this very thin veil between going into the energy of the nature spirits and the fairies and the gnomes and the other kingdoms that existed. It took me right out on my periphery of understanding. And that became, I've only really appreciated it in the last 5 or 6 years, since I've started to get into quantum physics and I've started to understand what goes on in those directions. So my wife and I came back, and I decided to be an artist. So I became an artist for 5 or 6 years, a professional artist, and went broke very slowly. Sold the house, spent all the money trying to be an artist. So I decided to go back to acupuncture, because at least I could do that. And I got involved in a few things. One, we started following these Indian masters. And the reason I followed them was they had a big convention on the Gold Coast, about 1,000 people. And they were called the Oneness Group, Oneness University. And we, funnily enough, I was in Melbourne looking at my brother, and I found the Oneness book before I found Oneness. I thought, oh, this is interesting. It talked about amazing miracles and things happening and everything. And what I haven't said is that in 1980, I started the Course in Miracles, and I've been a Course in Miracles student for over 40 years. And the Oneness, though, when they said, okay, we're going to give you a blessing, and they went around us and they just placed their hands on our head. And I counted 9 blessings that day. I had 9 people come along and put their hands on my head. And I just went into, like, you know, whoa, this is better than my old days on drugs, you know. This is really good. And so we got involved, my wife and I, we got involved for about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. We went to India, we did all the studies with them, we, you know, became blessing givers, and we ran the biggest sort of group on the Gold Coast. We got about 50 people blessed, you know, by people from Adelaide, and they became blessing givers and everything. And it was a really interesting process because there was still a lot of ego involved in it. There was still a lot of, you know, Tony Robbins and his wife took it on. So you can imagine what happened then, you know, it's like, you know, the ego thing went way out. But we ended up going to Fiji, to Tony Robbins' place, and we always remember sitting down and the two masters, our Bhagavan turns up, and they had them out the front, you know. But Tony and his wife were on a higher chairs, sitting over here looking down at everybody. You know, because we went, that is just so rude in India, like to put yourself above the masters, you know. But what I learned from that, I learned that there was 2 ways to find God. And one was self-inquiry, like going into the mind and working through the mind. You know, so all meditation techniques basically go in these 2 directions. They go towards discovering your true self. Who am I? It's the classic old question. But the second one is devotion. Like in India, they just devote themselves totally to the point they lose themselves in their concept of God. And they have miracle after miracle happen. You know, the holy ash on the pictures of the masters, the special oils coming out of the pitcher onto the floor, so much that it stains the carpet and stains everything, you know. And while we were there were miracles happening. And of course of miracles. I'm entitled to miracles, so let's see what happens. And that was a really fantastic experience, but it led us to the next thing, which was matrix energetics, which I don't know if anyone's done matrix energetics or no. Yeah, this one, that's good. 2, yeah, oh great. Talking to the converted, that's good. And we became, matrix energetics was a guy called Richard Bartlett, a chiropractor, but he had the ability to just touch people and they would just fall down, they would collapse. It was like a born-again revival meeting, you know. And it was interesting with Richard because he said the only way he could understand what was happening with these people just getting touched and just falling over and having healings, I mean, we'll talk about the healings, but he said he started reading quantum physics books. He read about 50 of them. And he also had a big background of acid taking, which I'm finding a lot of people who are out there doing these things now have this sort of door open, you know, this door. And he said what he understood was that when he touched somebody, he put them into a quantum field, the brain couldn't handle the amount of input. The brain just got swamped with the amount of information pouring into it. And it had to reboot. So it would just fall over. And I think this is what happens with Christians with, you know, when they're up on stage, you know, it's like the brain can't handle the amount of information pouring into it. And Richard would say, well, you know, you just have to go with it. And he used to, people would fall over so quickly he couldn't catch them. So he had catchers. So Sean and I became catchers on stage. You know, we'd stand behind them ready for them to go, you know. And the weird thing was it was really hard to stand behind somebody and not go myself, you know, because you could feel the shift of energy go through that person to such a degree that, you know, so we had to really be conscious of not letting it move through us, like not letting it move through us and putting us down on the ground, you know. And that opened my whole field of quantum physics. Yeah, so, I don't know, how are we going for time? Oh, perfect, look at that, half an hour. So I've got a big background and I've got many years experience and I've got many years of stories and things like that to talk about. But what I really want to give you today is I want to be able to help you get the key to open your own unconscious. Get the way of shifting your whole mind, shifting your whole lifestyle, if you want to. It's not saying it's compulsory. But if you want to be able to move to a greater reality, you have to be able to change the way you think. It's that simple. Now, in the Course of Miracles, Christ says, all the miracle worker has to do is accept the undoing of error for himself. In other words, it's the undoing of errors that are causing us to be, I won't even say half-brained. There's a theory that we use anywhere between 1 to 10% of our brain, normal people. Okay? So we're all a bit stupid. We're all a bit closed off. We're all a bit locked down. We're all a bit stuck in our thought systems. Our brains are not designed, or they're designed, but they haven't been taught any opening of possibility. We need a school system where the emphasis on the teacher learning in a super positive way, like a super learning way. The difficulty is that we're not taught that way. When I was teaching super learning and doing workshops, I'd get teachers who'd come to me and say, I love it, Rob, it's all fantastic, but the headmaster won't let me do it. Or, I'm in a Catholic church, or I'm in a Catholic school, they won't, that's definitely, it's going to get too spooky there. In fact, it was banned in one state. I remember super learning was banned in one state in the States. Or was it Grangeham? Banned because it was too far out there. And this is what's going to happen. We're going to come right, we are at the moment, we're in this incredible, powerful time. COVID was beautiful. COVID cracked the egg, like it took us up to, what do you really believe? Where do you get your beliefs and your stories from? And let's face it, the newspapers made it the worst. Because we all believe what they say is true, And, this looks a pretty wise group. I don't think you're conned into believing any more of this. But, like in newspapers and stuff, there's a central clearinghouse in Sydney, which, to save all the television companies money, they go to these places and get the same bit of information, right? So that means, and what are they looking for? They're not looking for something that's going to be lifting and inspiring, because you'll be too relaxed to probably come back to it. They look for something that'll get your adrenaline, get your brain hooked. They'll get you something to look at, so they'll make something scary and something fearful. And so it makes the world look like it's fearful. But I can tell you right here and now, the world's in one of the most beautiful, wonderful places you can possibly imagine. If we start to look differently, start to look at what we're looking at, you'll start to see a different world. I can send 5 of you down the same street, and every one of you will come back with a different story of that street. If you're into clothes, food, cars, sex, what else is it? Health. What's that? What?
Streets.
Yeah, but the point is, if you go down that street, and you will see what you want to see. See, the brain is programmed right from the beginning. Even in the womb, you are developing a brain. And I've got some facts here that I'd like to share with people. And the first one is the development of the fetus. Okay. Now, I was just reading last night that the heart develops 3 weeks before the fetus, before the brain. So 3 weeks before the brain comes online, blood has to be moved around. Okay. So roughly what happens at 5 weeks, the brain starts to grow in the fetus. Now, at 8 weeks, they talk about the first brain spurt. And this is where you're laying down 2,000 neurons per minute. So the brain's laying 2,000. By 12 weeks, the brain is now doing 2,000 neurons per second. It's growing that many. By 20 weeks, all your cells are laid down in the brain. Roughly around 15,000 million cells. 15 million. Would that be?
Trillion.
No, we don't want to go trillion yet. We only want to go to millions. About 15,000 million. That goes into billions. But anyway, the brain lays down its main amount of cells. Now, have you ever thought, at the very moment of conception, what happens to this one cell? This one cell gets triggered. There's an energy spark. There's something to activate that cell, the fertilized cell, into life. I don't think we ever go there enough. Do we ever understand that one cell all of a sudden becomes alive? And what is life? What is that spark? Now, from that one cell, every cell in your body gets developed. That means your hair, your skin, your bones, your organs. That cell has the innate wisdom to produce everything in order. You know, deformity comes when things aren't in order. It's the way they're supposed to be unfolding. Heart first, blood, then brain. And every organ gets developed that way. Now, in Chinese medicine, they see the organs holding energy. So they see the organs were developed by what energy wanted to be in the body, not the other way around. In Western medicine, the organ creates the chemistry. It becomes into matter. But no, the point is, in your body is this huge energy system, an innate wisdom in every cell, unfolding naturally through its DNA and RNA code. Now that's extraordinary when you think about it. And the other thing is too, that chemistry, two chemicals don't bond unless they've got an electrical charge. That's the other thing. You can't have any chemistry without some form of electrical charge, turning it into matter. Yes.
Does that mean one has to be positive, one has to be negative?
Yes.
To attract?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's exactly where we get into yin and yang. But the point is, yes, you need, in your brain, you have two chemicals, sodium and potassium. And they create the electrical charge down the nerves, right? Now the question is, if you ask, who am I sodium or am I potassium? or am I the charge that comes from sodium, that's being created? So okay, so more information. All cells are completed by 20 weeks. Now what happens is by 30 weeks, we get a second brain spurt that starts to happen. And that begins to form neuron connections. Now they can run into the trillions. So every cell can be connected in multiple ways. And you do. You have some cells that are only connected to one other cell, some connected to hundreds, some, Now, what happens to make those cells connect? There's a lovely quote here I've got, is the power of the brain depends upon the number of neurons and the richness of their connections. Now, the connections are formed by stimulation. That's the next point. What stimulates your brain cells to connect? Now, the basic ones would be, you learn to walk, you learn to talk, you learn to eat, you learn to control your bowels. I mean, all these things you have to learn, a child learns. That means that you're in a brain energy that's learning all the time. And it's making those connections. And we forget about that. What an incredible power that is, right? Now, the thing I also like to talk about is the three brains. You have three brains, maybe 5 brains, depending on how you decide to cut your brain in halves and things. You have the reptilial brain, which is the brain that starts up your spine and goes up into your brain. At the top of that, you have the limbic brain, where all the hormones are, where all that's being produced. And above that, then you have the neurocortex, the memory area of the brain. So you have these 3 brains that are working. Some people also talk about the cerebellum. Some people just talk about the specific organs, the specific glands in the brain that do the job. But overall, these 3 brains are working all the time. Now, you have 3 directions. For me to know I'm standing here, I've got to have nerve cells in my feet. I've got to have nerve cells in my neck, and I've got to have nerve cells in my ears to tell me that I'm upright. Now what those 3 things do is that then they activate certain organs. Like your liver gets activated when you first step out of bed and put your feet down on the floor. That activates your liver. Your heart's beating all the time. All this is being done unconsciously, subconsciously, whatever. Imagine if you had to control all that consciously. Okay, I've woken up. Heart, keep beating. Breathe, breathe, breathe. Bowels, stay where you are. I'm going to lift the left leg. No, bowels, stay where you are. Breathe, keep breathing. I mean, you are not in control. I can tell you right here and now. At a conscious level, you are not in control of your body, let alone your life. And that's the thing we have to start to recognise, is that there's so much different levels of consciousness going on in us. And it's up to us then to decide what we want to do with it. Because we're given all we need. So you've got these 3 brains, and you've got the ability to, how to explain it? Let me just see what I've said here. So your reptilial brain controls your basic instinct responses. And that means that it's like if you touched an iron, you pull your hand back quickly because you're going to burn your fingers. That's not, oh, I think I can smell something, oh, I better move my hand. You just pull back. So that's your reptilial brain doing it. And then your limbic system, that's the one that controls your emotions. You know, your sexuality, your pleasure senses are all going through this central area of the brain. And then the neurocortex controls the intellectual processes. So if we start to look at the stimulation that happens to make the cells grow, we start to recognise that the stimulation is emotions. Because all those fibres up the spine have to move through the limbic area and then out into the brain. So everything has an emotional response. Everything we're motivated by is emotion. Okay. Now, fear is, you know, classic one, but fear is there to protect us. So there's a fear response through the sympathetic. That's there to warn you. You know, it's there to keep you aware of things, and that's great if you can then go and relax. But if you're in a constant state of stress, what happens? You burn the brain out, literally. You burn the glands, if you want to say. You overstimulate to such a point that you're on awareness all the time. And the trouble is that then starts to show up in relationships. It starts to show up in your work. It starts to show up in your mental health. It starts to show up in your physical energy. It starts to show up in every way. The stress. I mean, they're now saying people like Bruce Lipton, who is a biologist, says they're starting to recognise that stress is the main motivator of the that aggravates the RNA and the DNA of the genetic code. You know, they did a genetic code thing. They said, okay, well, we're going to look at everything and we're going to map it and we're going to come up. And they said, okay, now humans have about, well, first of all, they said, okay, we'll look at things like insects, and insects have about 24,000 chromosomes. And I'll say, well, hold on. I'll say, hold on, the humans must be amazing. We must have so many, amazing things. And then when they look at us, we've got about 26,000. And they'll go, hey, how can it only be these few changes in the code? What they did though was they only looked at things that they thought connected with humans, but they had a whole bunch of junk code that they chucked out the window, right? Yeah, as if the human body, as if the body would produce all this junk code that we don't know about, right? And so we can start to look at, now they're starting to say that how we think, how we feel, what we do, has a direct effect on that code. You don't have to have a genetic illness, to die from that. You can go and change the code with your own mind, and you can take yourself away from those things. So, stimulation is the main cause of causing us emotionally to start thinking and how we feel. Now, if you've been brought up under a stressful environment, if you've had a lot of problems in your life, if you've been not taught how to use your mind, you're going to keep playing the same old pattern. One of the things I found with research was you build the patterns up to parts of the brain. So if you have somebody who says, okay, well, like my mum, she would say, oh, well, I don't like green cars. And I'd say, why, Mum? She said, because every time I've had an accident, I've been in a green car, right? So just seeing a green car is enough for her to go, okay, I'm not going there, And that's what you do. You start to build up your patterns.
She's still buying green cars?
So, she's dead now, but she could be in a green car, I don't know. But we've developed these patterns, and the patterns, say you're just even driving a car. If you're driving a car, you have become a subconscious pattern of knowing how to drive. You don't sit there and go, you did at the beginning, but once you've learnt it, once it's been programmed in, you don't have to put it consciously all the time. You know, now you can drive down the street and whistle at the girls and have your cigarette at the window. And you're not thinking about, oh, brake, stop, move here. None of that. It's all gone subconscious. And most of your life, that's what happens. You learn something. Once you learn it, it goes into a program in your brain. You know, the old computer thing is, you know, garbage in, garbage out. Pretty much if the program has been put that way, then until you're consciously aware of it, it won't change. Now, the thing is, that's the first step to changing, is we have to become consciously aware of our programming. And there's a program for everything that you do automatically. Every way you, even everything you say, how you talk, everything is in a program. And there might be combinations or layers of these programs, which will then give you your personality. Now, the personality comes from the Greek meaning persona, the word persona. And persona was the old Greek mask. You know, they never acted, they just held up the happy mask or the sad mask, you know. And the persona is, your persona is your happy or your sad mask. What do you want to play each day? You know? And you go places, you play a sad or an angry or whatever if you're trying to push somebody off you, and you're happy and want to bring someone close. So you all know that. You can all look at it. You've already summed up each other in this room already. You've summed me up already. You've got me sorted out. Because you've looked at me through your programming and going, oh yeah, he's very handsome. Okay, Shauna. I still love you. But you know, this is what you do with everybody. Politicians on TV. I mean, do you know when they're lying? Do you know when they're telling the truth? Yeah, because your own body language, your own ability to learn knows. And we're not even talking intuitively there. We haven't even got onto the intuitive spiritual side of the body and the brain. So, what type of stimulation do you give yourself? Are you a happy person who thinks only happy thoughts? Are you a sad person, a miserable person, a warrior, you know, Virgo? You know, what is your predominant emotion that you play out? And I can guarantee you learnt it. You know, like I said, with kids, they found who had been abused children couldn't even produce the right chemicals in their brain. The brain didn't know how to, I'm not sure if it's serotonin or melatonin, one of those. Which one? Serotonin. It was serotonin. So serotonin, they couldn't even produce that. And you have to get hold of it. I mean, I really loved Law of Attraction and Abraham. And I was endeavouring to change things. I went through a lot of stress financially about 10, 12 years ago where I simply became broke. I didn't want to treat people anymore because I was so sensitive to what they were doing and saying. I still am in some ways. Like being a healer, you learn to heal by observing. You're looking at the problem all the time and you're then looking at, you know, people will come in, they'll dump their stuff on you for an hour and they'll go, gee, I feel really good. And now I'm trying to work out, you know, what I'm going to do. And if you have, you know, 15, 20 people of those a day, you've got a program of how to work with people. You're taught to look, you're taught to observe, you're taught to see body shape, angles, design, colour, you know, everything, eye diagnosis. I mean, everything is there to teach you, let's find the problem. And that's the big problem with Western medicine. It's designed to look at the problem and not the solution. You know? All of the big machines that we spend billions of dollars on are there to come up with a diagnosis. And how do you treat? Oh, we haven't spent a lot of time on that. We just give you chemistry, or we surgically cut it out, or maybe we radiate it. We'll try those three main areas, okay? That's why natural therapy is natural medicine, is that they've spent the time clinically experiencing. You know, herbal medicines come from experience. Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic, you take the type of, you know, even chiropractic, it's come from experience after experience after experience. Because we're constantly having to prove ourselves. Because we're attacked all the time. And we're attacked from a very bad medical system that is self-destroying itself and destroying huge amounts of human beings. Now, I say Western medicine is fantastic on life preserve to get you out of the life and death situation into life. If I have a car accident, don't take me to my naturopath. Get me to my doctor or my hospital, but after that, bring in the acupuncturist or the masseuse or the kinesiologist, so we can start getting the healing in the body to produce, start to activate it. And I don't know where I went then. Space off. And so from the other point of view is we've got these brains. We've got left brain and right brain. Now we know from the 80s that the left brain and the right brain have been able to decide and say, okay, your left brain is logical, it's rational, it's analytical. Now I'm grouping this bigger because it happens all over the brain, but the left brain has the linear, the logical, the rational way of thinking. The right brain is more rhythm, it's vision, it's more emotion, it's more feelings. And what happens is that, well, the way they found was they used to have this treatment. I don't know, I was reading recently, they might even still be doing it. For epileptic fits, they would go in and halve the brain. So instead of having the epileptic fit go right across to both sides of the brain, they just saw it in half. The trouble was when the person was well, and they'd get up and they'd go, I need to choose a colour, and both hands would come out, and they couldn't decide on, well, which one do I like? Which colour does work? They found people were like half-brained. They weren't able to basically put the two things together, do the crossover, what we call cross. When you sing a song, you use your left brain and for words, and you use your right brain for rhythm and for music. That's why songs are so powerful. They use the whole brain. Now, I don't know if you can, well, another way to look at it is if I get you to visually look at something along the ceiling, pick something to look at. And if you can, without sticking your hands in the person's face next door, reach out your hands and see if you can feel where you can start to see your fingers moving here. Now I can do that, okay? So I'm looking straight ahead, but I can see my hands moving here. Now that's pretty amazing when you think about it. I've got 180 degree, there's another thing you can do too, is put one hand like this, put one hand on your head and sing, I'm a little teapot. It works better when you're standing up. So I can see 180 degrees with my vision. Now that's right brain. And I can pick something, focus on something, that's left brain. Now both those things are happening at the same time. Because if I'm walking down the street and all of a sudden, a car comes to me, I don't go, oh, look, a car, I better change my, change. I react straight away. Okay, put on the brake. So it's often your peripheral vision that saves you, keeps you able to go through life without getting donged on the head. Okay? But it's your focus vision that helps you read, it helps you communicate, it helps you educate, it helps you, read maps, all those sort of things. So these two things are always happening, and the difficulty with most of us is we've been taught in a left brain way. We've been taught to use logic and rationale, and the intuitive side of this has been squashed. I can't remember the age of these kids, but they were looking at these kids who were all intuitive. I think it must have been about 4, and they were all intuitive, these kids. And they sent them to school for a year, and only 20% were left with their intuitiveness. They come out of the garden, I saw a fairy. Oh, yeah. So the point was that we had these abilities when we were young, but they got shut down, they got squeezed, they got held back. Now, what happens when you meditate and you go into stillness? That's the issue. What happens? What happens when you quieten down the mind? When you quieten down both sides of the mind, where do you go? where do you go? You know, be still and know that I am God. You know, be still. Even Abraham talks about taking 15 minutes a day just to be quiet and to be still and to not think. Now the big problem with all meditators is, I can't stop my mind from thinking. But what you can do is you can stop your mind from thinking about thinking. Now what I mean by that is, do you ever sit in meditation or ever sit quietly and go, my voice, I hear this voice inside of me, I just hear this voice. And all of a sudden realize that there's somebody speaking in my head. And then also realize that there's someone listening in my head at the same time. Have you ever thought about that? Go into your mind and go, whoa, there's the listener and there's the talker. Yeah? And I've come to realize that all my problems in life are in my head. That's it, really. There's all that bloody voice that I can't shut up, or that's coming up with all the negative and seeing all the problems. It's all inside me. It's not out there. You know? Because I have the ability to change. Choice produces results. You know, the brain is choosing all the time. Constantly. Zillions. You know. At a quantum field, you know, the brain is in this huge sea of energy. Well, let's go there. This is where we will start to stretch the brain. I sent a girl home one day after talking about it. Once I got into Richard Bartlett and started working with the quantum field, there were two things he talked about that changed my whole way of thinking. And there were two experiments that they did in quantum physics. The first experiment was called the double slit experiment. It's on YouTube if you want to go and look at it. But what they did was they decided to shoot atoms through two slits, photons through a slit, and they had a photographic plate, and they wanted to see what would happen to the photons. And the weird thing was that they'd shoot one, but it would split and turn up on both ones, right? And they would call this as particles. And in quantum, they can't do particles and movement at the same time. When they try to trace movement, they lose the particle. When they try to find the particle, they've lost it. It's become still. So in this experiment, they started doing this, and they would let it keep running, and they'd go out of the room. And when they came back, the whole pattern on the plate had changed into waves. It had gone into this wave where there was lines and sort of empty in between them. It had what they call this wave pattern. When they came back in and looked at it, it went back into just random particles. So they went, what's going on here?
Why is this so?
Yeah, why is it so?
Yeah.
And of course they came up to realizing was that they had an effect. Their minds had a direct effect on the particles. Yeah, that's a brilliant experiment. Think about it. That their minds were changing the observation. You know, What the Bleep Do We Know? Have you ever watched that movie? Mm-hmm. Definitely recommend watching it if you haven't watched The Bleep Do We Know. So that was the one experiment. Okay. The observer changes. Now what does that mean? How does the observer get to the photons and change it on the plate? What's going on there between them and that? How come their consciousness is changing it? And of course they started to recognize that everything was one. You know, at that subatomic level, everything was one. Always one. Always in every place. There was no time, there was no past, there's no future. It's just right here, now doing its thing. The second experiment I loved was the 0 point field. And the 0 point field is when they said, okay, energy produces heat. So the atoms are, moving around. So what if we cool everything down? Let's try and get everything cold down to zero. There shouldn't be any movement and there shouldn't be any heat. And I think they used helium and they got down to 0.002% of zero. What freaked them all out was when they got there was nothing but energy. Everything went into a sort of whole ocean of energy. They touched the whole ocean of energy. It was like everything was connected. The universe, the energy, all the subatomic level, everything was one. Everything was joined. There was no place that they couldn't find it. And they started to realize that every atom, every photon and stuff, they're not in just one location. They're producing what they call a field. They can't, until they look at it, then they can find the place where it is, which is really weird. But the thing is, they recognise that this energy was everywhere, always present, always manifesting depending on our observation, bringing things into matter. Now, this is where it gets really exciting. Because what it means is that you create your reality. But you do it at a subatomic level, not just, oh, I think these things. You literally are manifesting this room right now. Not blowing your mind, it should. The thing is, everything you see, everything you touch, everything you look at, everything you smell, everything, your 5 senses, everything is manifesting reality. This is your reality. This is your illusion. This is your delusion. This is your dream. Of course, in miracles, they talk about the dream. That God is in the bedroom with you. You're in the crib having a nightmare called life. And God goes, look, I know you're okay. I'm here. I'm going to protect you. There's nothing going to happen to you. Have your dream. Do what you like. Experiment. Play around. I'm not going to take your free will away from you, but you're here. You're ready. Because if God went over and like, wake up, and you brought that nightmare into heaven, or whatever you want to call it, that would mean that God now had a separation. And the divine won't do that. Because as soon as you have a separation, you get into yin and yang, you get into the opposites, the polarity opposites, which is what this dimension is. So what happens is you get all this information through the right brain, generally. I'm not talking about the heart yet, because that's a whole other story. But you're picking up this information, it's coming through, it's now having to go linear, so it's got the big picture, the parallel universes. It now has to go through with the way you think and how you decide, and it then comes into the left brain, and it comes out as speech, or it comes out as action, or it comes out as matter, So all this is doing, this is slower than the air that I'm breathing, okay? But they're still joined. Now, the interesting fact is everything is popping in and out at the 0 point field. And they've literally charted it. They've I just read recently, 7.8 times a second. How the hell did they work that out? At 7.8 times a second, every atom, every neutron is popping in and out all the time. So you're manifesting what you think. And in What the Bleep, they do it beautifully. They have a guy in a basketball thing, and they have all the balls moving up and down right behind him, and then he looks around, and then one ball disappears. And that's it. As soon as you look at something, you've just gone from wave into particle. You've just done a measurement. And that's all that Richard would teach in his workshop. He'd just touch somebody, and he'd go, right, I'm going to let my mind go where I need to go. Oh, I like your earring. And he would go, I like your earring. I'm going to take your earring, and I'm just going to put it, I'm going to put it in your heart. Boom. And the woman would go, she'd just go over. He had people walking into his clinic, and he'd go, hi, my name's Richard. And the guy would go, hi. Because he was allowing space. He always had a totally open mind. He also had a totally open space. He never tried to control the possibilities, and that's what we are all doing. We are trying to control our lives through what we've been taught, and it's all limited. How we've been taught, what we think is all being limited. It's like you only watch one channel. You don't allow all the other channels to be there. And now this moves me on to frequency and vibration. This room at the moment is full of information, absolutely full of information. Mobile phones, television, satellite, that's the stuff we know about, okay? We've developed machinery to tell us. But the interesting fact is that I don't have to go anywhere to get that information. I can tune in my own radio set and go to it if it doesn't have any blocks on it. Okay? But if I've only got certain channels I go to, then that's all I'll get. I'll keep condensing everything down into its channels. Now in the quantum field, it's wide open. At 0 point field, you can create anything you want. Now I was reading, one of my favourite authors is Joe Dispenza. So if you really wanted to get into this stuff and want to have all the research and you want to have all the development, he's got 4 books out and every one of them is a good read. You know? And when you talk, he's got the research, because he would take an audience of, I don't know, what do they have, 2,000 people or something like that there. And he would take them and he'd take the front 2 rows and he'd put the EEG machines on them and he'd put all these different machines. So he'd be testing the whole couple of front rows with what they were going through while he was teaching these meditation techniques, talking about what I'm talking about. And for me, what I love about Joe was he took what I was teaching in the 80s with super learning and he just took it and just expanded it out, you know. And this is what's happening to us all at the moment, this amount of information that we're getting now around the brain and how we see reality and how we create it. So the photon energy, what I love too, and Joe said this, was, he said, if everything's popping in and out, does that mean we're popping in and out? Because we're photons, we're parts of the particles and everything like that. So are we popping in and out? Like it's 7.8 times per second. Are our reality shifted? Now you can start to get into the psychic fields of what thing pops in and what thing pops out and where it comes from. And, you know, the more open you are to these things, the more you'll start creating these things. But they'll still have to go through your processor. They'll still have to go through your programming. You know? If you look at, you know, I looked at, like, you know, I follow some spiritual masters, but one master is Ramana, Sri Ramana. And if you look at his life, was he at 16 just went into samadhi. He just went into a total state of bliss, total state of, you know, out of his tree. And he took himself off to a famous mountain in India, Arundachala, and he just vanished into the hills. And he was so not connected to his body that they found him, I'm not sure how much later, but he was covered in sores, his hair, his nails, he had no connection to his physical body. His body was just, you know. And of course they recognised, you know, he's a master, and so they took him down and they fed him and clothed him and washed him and kept him clean. And they looked after him, and for the rest of his life he sat there at the bottom of that mountain. And people would just come into his presence, and he never talked very much. He believed, he said, do the inquiry, who am I? But he was in silence most of the time. And people would go into esoteric, no, ecstasy was ecstasy. They would go into ecstasy just being in his presence. And that was it's quite common in India. Like, you know, we go on about Christ and the miracles before. In India, it's happening all the time with all these masters. Like, there's so many masters in them, you know. And it's just we in the West try to make it all logical and rational. And since we do that, we condense it back down again. So if you look in quantum fields, you have an openness to every bit of information, and you're in this amazing place of popping in and out of the 0 point field, and you are, it's really up to you. There's nothing I could give you except just help you say there's lots that you can go and do. There's every meditation technique, every counselling technique, every spiritual comes back to how can we help them let go of this stuff and find who they truly are, like find the true power within, true power within. So, yes, please.
Do you have any information regarding the brain in the heart or the thought?
Yes, but if you've got another hour. There's a great section in Joe Dispenza's books that talk about the heart. Right. And what I can say about the heart is that it's got 1,000 times more energy than the brain.
True.
Yeah. And it sends out the rhythm of the heart. They can diagnose now, you know, heart rate variables, what they call HRV. They can diagnose and tell you exactly what's happening in your brain and what's happening in your energy and even your health. They can tell you the level of your health by just watching this the beat of your heart, because your heart is directly related to your brain. Mm-hmm. So the heart just constantly is there, sending out messages. You know it. I mean, where do you feel love? You know, in the cheek. I mean, you know, where do you feel love? Like, where do you feel love? You know.
It depends, isn't it?
No, we're not talking about men. We're talking about where you feel love, right? But you know, so your feelings will go to a place where you're holding that energy. And that's all you have to do. Go in. Really, all you have to do is love it. You know. Love created you, you know, and you are love, and you are popping in and out in loving fields. You know. And the heart is a great place to work.
And you mentioned,
I'll open this up. Any questions? Because we'll just do say 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll have a break. Okay.
like with Einstein, I think he had that theory about what was it, spooky action
In
at
a distance. Yeah, yeah.
where everything was connected and anything recognised, everything was conscious. And
Yeah, but he couldn't handle it. That's why he called it. It's just spooky action at a distance.
Okay, he hadn't actually.
He couldn't work it out. He couldn't
Yeah.
work it out. You know, I do a bioresonance program it's called Spooky. Spooky too. Okay, any questions? I've answered all your questions, fantastic.
Well, you need to give them a little bit of time to think of something
Yeah.
now that you're open to questions.
Yes. All right, I just put on a sheet here my contact details with I'm looking at doing a 1-day workshop on these essentials, like getting into it deeply and looking at what we can do to increase this openness. And I also have an online course called Breaking the Stress Cycle, which I've sort of had sitting there for ages, and I'm just starting to put it out again. So, and that has a lot of information that we've been talking about. You know, it gives you some techniques.
Are they held on the Gold Coast or where are they held?
It's going to be held around here, probably looking.
On the Sunshine Coast?
Yeah, probably
Okay.
Perigium. There'll probably be somewhere
yeah.
down there if I can get the room. You know, or we'll do it here with Mike.
The charges are going up if that's the case.
It will be going up. Yeah, so if you want a sheet of paper, have that, please. Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to ask about like different frequencies for music.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you're looking for a frequency, say to relax or sleep, I get confused on the whole. Like, is it 432? Is it 528? Is it 936?
Yes.
Like for healing, all of them.
They're all frequencies. You've got to understand that. Let's just look at the way the universe is formed. We've got gamma rays, which are very fast frequencies, and that go through everything. You've got gamma, and then down at the bottom here we've got matter, solid matter, and then roughly we could say we've got sound, like radio waves. We've got light, and light is made up of 7 colours. So every one of these things, from matter to gamma, have all frequencies. And they are really small frequencies. Like they're not, you know, it's not like you have to go 100 or whatever. They can be like, well, the program I've got, it takes you up to 8 decimal points, basically. So there's zillions of frequencies. And everything in the universe has its frequency. That's what they discovered when they got into the quantum field, that everything has a frequency. So when you look at music, music has a wonderful way of working with the body. In super learning, we used to teach that if you used Baroque music, which is around 60 beats a minute, would put you into alpha very quickly. But if you wanted to teach something and keep people awake, you'd give them classical music, because classical music was not calming. You know, Beethoven, it was all over the place, and you had to stay awake to listen to it. You couldn't zone out on it. Whereas, you know, if you go into alpha, theta, the brain will start to relax and inflammation. And we found that psychic things, for psychic abilities, a psychic has the ability to drop into those parts of the brain where that slow rhythm is. I mean, I love music, and my brother's a musician, and you know, I even got him to do a relaxation music tape for me. But the things I included in it was 60 beats a minute. Okay, I don't care what you put in there, put in 60 beats a minute. Put in some stringed instruments, and these are the things they've found in the super learning will literally open the brain for memory. You know, so I recommend playing music all the time. Normally, when I teach a workshop, I'll have music just quietly in the background, because they found even kids who weren't listening to the radio, and they would pick up 15% more by having the radio playing in the background. Images, advertising, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so there's so much on music. Really. Solfeggio techniques, all the vibrations. It's great. All right. Anybody else? How long do we break for? Sorry,
Like
yes,
10
question.
minutes
I've
and
got one up there. Yes.
Going back to that pinhole experiment,
Yeah.
you mentioned that when they came into the room,
Yeah.
the energy became chaotic.
No, the other way around. when they were in the room started to have a wave. It started having a wave. It was when they stepped out of the room, it went chaotic. No, I'm sorry. No, you're right. See, I'm sorry. Talking too much. You're right. When they came into the room, it went particle. So it went all over the place, chaotic.
And when they'd been out of the room for some amount of time,
It went into a wave.
yeah,
A wave.
it went into the wave.
Yeah, yeah,
Can you relate that, because of quantum physics,
yeah.
can you relate that to 0 point energy? When it hits the third dimension, when it's in third dimension,
Right.
it is chaotic. When you're in fourth dimension,
Yeah,
it becomes a little bit more organised.
yeah,
And in the fifth dimensional and up, it becomes the wave,
yeah.
that perfect wave, which means we can manifest things instantly.
Yes, and that's where we're heading. And it's funny you say that, because just this morning or yesterday, I was meditating on the wave, and I thought they show you these, all they do is show you these two columns of particles with a gap in between it. And I thought, where does the gap go? Where's the particle go? And I thought, would that flip into another dimension, like a parallel universe? So is there two of me flipping in and out, like, one's, so is there two of me, a parallel universe that's going on where when I'm not here, I'm somewhere else, and then I come back to being here. And I thought, there's no one ever says anything about where does, in the wave, where does those photons go in that thing? They say, it's at the lower level, but they don't explain where it goes. Like where things just vanish. How can we just vanish? I was watching this thing on Tibetan monks who die, and they call them the rainbow deaths, where they've found that that their body just, they found three different things happen. One, their body just collapsed, and they found them in this fetal position, all shrunken up. Another one they found was that as they were coming to death, each time they'd go and visit him, his body would get smaller and smaller and smaller until it just vanished. And then the third one they found was that he would just die and he would just go into rainbow light and then vanish. So these are dimensions. See, our brains need a lot of work. We've got the equipment, we just haven't got the programming. Spiritual masters have. They just naturally flip into it. And we're getting children born with that ability too,
We had a lady here in November, and she lives in Karoi. She's a psychic medium,
Yeah.
and she was talking about teleporting from her place into, was it Brisbane?
Yeah, she can do it?
Yeah, she can do
Ooh.
it. She does it regularly.
Really?
Yeah, she's famous. She's been on TV with
Yeah.
Sensing Murder and stuff like that.
Right.
She just lives down the road.
I mean, many Indian masters have been known to be in two places. And when we were in India, we were watching local TV, and on local TV, they had these things. They had all these miracles on local news television. And one was this picture of a guy standing on the edge of a sort of temple near a lake, somewhere up in the Himalayas. And the next minute, you just saw him smear off into the distance. Like he just raised up and then just vanished into the distance. And someone caught it on their camera, and they put it on national news. You wouldn't be seeing that here, but they're going, yeah, every time they see him, yes. Oh, sorry, this gentleman asked me. So,
A while ago, I was doing some breathing,
yeah,
and while I was doing breathing, I noticed beneath that they connected to everything, the
Yes.
trees and the plants and everything.
yeah.
Can you explain that to me?
I think, I hope I have. But the point is, again, it's the vibration rate you drop. So if you drop down into a vibrational rate,
Yeah.
because what's happening, we're manifesting this faster than light. So we're, if it was slower than light, we'd see it manifesting. So the vibration, as you start to relax and lower yourself, you start to drop into the vibrationalness of experience, of seeing it. Because what we're after is experience. I mean,
That's right.
all this knowledge means nothing to me if I can't have some profound spiritual experiences to say, yes, it's working. So it means good. It means you're getting to a really good place.
That's right.
Yeah, nice.
Last question, we have a break here.
Yeah, okay.
I was chatting to a friend last night, and I said what I was doing today, and he just asked me what's quantum physics, and I'm like, I'll need a longer conversation for that. However, I said to them, have you seen the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once?
Yes.
And I said, it's about limitless possibilities, and they just kind of went, I didn't understand that movie. I went, I didn't love it.
I mean, that's the problem, see? We're coming in with all the old programming, or we're coming in with an open mind for the new program, see?
Well, it's unlearning everything you know,
Yeah,
going back to basics.
yes, because what happens is, you know, you get all your habits and your stuff in by the time you're, say, 14, 90% of your habits and attitudes are programmed in. You then spend the rest of your life trying to overcome them. Well, not trying to, you do, you can overcome them. But all programming is pretty much by the time we're 14. You know, so who's teaching you? What are they teaching you? All right, let's have a break. And
Have a break. More
what
questions?
I want to do afterwards is I just want to take you through a meditation,
Oh, okay.
a mind-opening meditation.
So no more questions?
No.
Okay.
No.
How long will it take,
How long do you
the
want?
meditation? Well,
Probably
there's
20
no,
minutes.
there's no
Probably
strict
25
rules.
minutes.
I know I'm Virgo, but it doesn't have
20,
to.
25 minutes.
Oh, you're one of
Okay.
those too.
Oh, another one. Another Virgo.
Sure, you can ask me.
Oh, it's another Virgo.
Excellent. Okay, guys, let's power up the grid.
Yeah, I'm gonna,
Okay, tell me one thing.